There's a peculiar problem taking place in America, and it's really causing a major problem for Glock pistols because one might argue that the ATF is handling a situation that they've never had to handle before. Something that's new. It's a new problem that they are having, and it's all revolving around the Glock pistol. And unfortunately, this problem is affecting the Glock pistol in such a way that there's federal talk of banning the Glock pistol. Now, really all of this revolves around the Glock switch because somebody in South America invented a Glock switch. And what this switch does is it's a very small part that can be placed inside a Glock pistol, and it turns a Glock pistol into a fully automatic pistol. And what the ATF has seen is that there's an increase in these Glock switches over the last 3 years by 590%. And they won't work on other pistols. They only will work on Glock. And this is causing a problem for Glock because the White House has put out a federal response team to really take a look at this while the ATF is hammering down on these Glock switches at an aggressive pace. Many people finding themselves facing severe federal prison sentences because they possess these Glock switches, especially if you find yourself making them and selling them, you're in a world of hurt. Now, the problem with these Glock switches, because one might say, well, I don't have a Glock switch, what do I care? Well, do you like Glocks? Me too. Big fan of Glock. The problem is that there is an effort by the federal government to suggest that Glock pistols, now that they know that these Glock switches are working in their pistols, that they should change their handgun to where it can't take the current Glock switch. Now, I want to share kind of a strange story that has nothing to do with Glock. When I first got out of college, I was a biology and chemistry major, and before I became a teacher, my very first job out of college, they actually recruited me while I was in college, was working for a law firm representing the tobacco industry. There was a major tobacco manufacturer, I'm not going to say their name, but they're one of the big ones, and I was always working for them, and what I did was I would go through their scientific data and assign it to certain court cases. Now, something I discovered is during that time is I kind of became a tobacco analyst over that time, but so I can tell you a lot about the tobacco industry. But one thing that I did learn, and this is back in around 1999, when there was just a ton of lawsuits coming against the tobacco company, there was one particular aspect of it where their paper would not go out. So like if I lit a cigarette, and I just set it in an ashtray, it would not go out. It would continue to burn. And what was happening was they were proving in court that these tobacco companies knew that it wouldn't burn, that it wouldn't stop burning because it makes you go through more cigarettes. And that people then were falling asleep with their cigarettes and their houses were burning down. Well, there was this company that invented this rolling paper that was banded. Where after, it goes through a few bands and then it goes out. Like if you don't smoke it, it's going to go out. Every single tobacco company in the world switched to banded rolling papers because they knew that now that we know that the court knows, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So we have to modify our product to ensure that we can continue to sell our product and not get sued. And this is something that Glock is facing. And so again, sorry about the long story, but this is the same thing. Glock is faced with a situation where, according to the White House and according to ATF, they now know that their product can take this switch, which they didn't invent the switch, but because they know now that these things can be placed in their gun and turn them into fully automatic, that they are now liable if they don't modify their handgun. So I believe that Glock is going to have to modify their handgun, or eventually it's going to lead to some sort of a ban or tons of lawsuits at the very least. Because when these tobacco companies made this decision, it was to avoid lawsuits. It's the wise thing to do. And now that Glock knows and the federal government knows they know, I believe they're going to have to make some choices, and so they're going to have to modify their handgun. I believe in the end that by the end of 2025, if they have not modified their handgun to not take these Glock switches, I think they're going to be in a world of hurt, mostly because of lawsuits. If you are a victim of a shooting that involved a Glock switch, you're not going after the guy that shot you as far as financially, and you're definitely not going after the guy that 3D printed that Glock switch. You're going after Glock. You're going after where the bread is, where the money's at, and that's where it's at, and that's what's beginning to happen. And that's something that Glock is just going to have to open their eyes to and accept. You know, the problem with modifying the Glock pistol is they really haven't made many modifications since the beginning of the Glock pistol. You know, there's been 5 generations now in most of their models. But it's kind of like when Ruger had the Blackhawk, and they were, if you look at the older Blackhawks, they had 3 screws in the side of them. And the problem was if you dropped that gun or that hammer, you struck that hammer on an open round, it would fire. So they modified it. Now the more modern Blackhawks have 2 screws in them because of that safety block. So now you can carry 6 rounds in it. If something hits that hammer, it's not going to go off. But I would argue that that action isn't nearly as nice, not nearly as nice. And I unfortunately believe that's probably what you're going to end up with if the Glock ends up modifying the Glock, really kind of a forced modification of the Glock pistol. I think you're going to end, kind of like the Ruger, you're going to end up with something that's just not quite as good. It's going to just mess something in there up. It's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong. But I believe Glock is faced with a situation unlike any other gun manufacturer has ever faced, where because somebody else produced a device that modifies their handgun, they're going to have to change their handgun just to show, hey, we tried. And that's kind of really what it comes down to, is to stop those lawsuits and stop any effort to ban the handgun in general. So there you go. Any thoughts or insight on any of this, definitely put it below. Do want to take a moment, since most people watch the channel, hey, they're not subscribers, click that subscribe button. It greatly increases the algorithm and our ability to get these messages out. Help us to get 500,000. That link is below. But the most important part of this channel, we take prayer requests. So please don't ever hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.